In the echoes of history, one vast unknown shaped everything. The moment when Atlantis Ocean was not a path, but a boundary between the known world and imagination itself. There was a time when no one crossed Atlantis, not because they lacked ships, not because they lacked courage, but because beyond the western horizon there was nothing, or at least, nothing anyone had ever returned to prove. To the ancient world, Atlantis was not an ocean. It was an ending, a place where maps stopped midline, where ink faded into emptiness, and where certainty gave way to silence. Sailors who approached its waters spoke in quieter tones. They watched the horizon, not with curiosity, but with restraint, because the sea behaved differently there. The winds shifted without warning. The currents pulled in directions no one could predict. The sky itself seemed heavier, as though pressing down on the water below. Stories spread from port to port, not written in books but carried in voices. Ships that sailed too far west, never returned. Crews that vanished without distress calls, without wreckage, without explanation. And so Atlantis became something more than water. It became a boundary, not just of geography, but of belief. In the absence of knowledge, imagination filled the void. Atlantis became a canvas for everything the ancient world could not explain. Beneath its surface, sailors believed, lived creatures of impossible scale, serpents that coiled through entire fleets, beasts whose shadows alone could darken the sea. Some spoke of waters that swallowed light itself, where the sun seemed to dim and the air grew still. Others told of islands that appeared without warning, green, inviting, almost unreal, only to vanish by morning, leaving no trace behind. There were whispers of voices, too, not human, not entirely, carried across the wind at night, calling sailors by name, drawing them further west, into waters no one had charted. These stories were not dismissed. They were respected, because Atlantis had a way of reinforcing them. Storms rose without pattern, waves climbed higher than ships were built to endure, and the deeper one sailed into its expanse, the more the familiar world seemed to fall away. Even the stars, those constant guides of ancient navigation, appeared to shift, subtly, as though the ocean itself distorted direction. In time, the line between myth and reality blurred, and for those who stood at the edge of that vast horizon, it hardly mattered which was which. There was, however, one place where the known world ended with certainty: the Pillars of Hercules. Two great cliffs marking the entrance to Atlantis, a threshold between the mapped and the unknown. To pass between them was not simply to sail west, it was to leave the world behind. Ancient civilizations marked this boundary with a warning: non plus ultra, nothing further beyond. It was not a suggestion, it was a conclusion. For generations, ships stopped there. They traded, they explored coastlines, but they did not cross into open ocean, not willingly, because beyond those pillars, the rules changed. Navigation became uncertain. Land disappeared for days, then weeks, then longer, and perhaps, most unsettling of all, distance lost its meaning. A journey westward offered no guarantee of return, no promise of land, no certainty of anything at all. And yet, Atlantis did not remain untouched, because curiosity has a way of challenging even the oldest fears. Over time, something began to change. The stories remained. The warnings endured, but so did a question, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. What if Atlantis was not an end, but a beginning? Early explorers began to test its edges. Carefully, cautiously, they sailed a little further each time, hugging coastlines, tracking currents, watching the sky for signs of change. They returned with fragments of understanding. The winds, they discovered, followed patterns. The currents, though powerful, were not random. The ocean, while vast, was not infinite. Piece by piece, the unknown began to take shape. Maps slowly extended westward. Blank spaces grew smaller. But Atlantis did not surrender easily. Storms still claimed ships without warning. Journeys still ended in silence. And for every mile gained, the sense of risk remained. Because even as knowledge grew, so did the scale of what remained undiscovered. Atlantis was no longer just a mystery. It was a challenge, and for the first time in history, men began to believe it could be crossed. The idea took hold slowly, then all at once. If Atlantis could be understood, it could be crossed. And if it could be crossed, then everything beyond it might finally be revealed. By the late 15th century, the hesitation that once defined the ocean began to fade. In its place came ambition. Ships were no longer built just to survive the sea, but to challenge it. Navigators studied the winds, learning to ride vast circular currents that carried them outward, and, if they survived, back again. The ocean, once feared for its unpredictability, began to show patterns, and patterns could be followed. Then came the journey that would change everything. In 1492, a fleet set sail westward, not in search of safety, but in defiance of uncertainty. Days turned into weeks. The horizon remained unchanged. No land, no sign of end, only water and doubt. Crew members grew restless. Supplies dwindled. The distance already traveled felt irreversible. Atlantis, vast and silent, seemed to stretch endlessly, as if testing how far belief could carry them. And then, land, not the edge of the world, not an abyss, but something real, something reachable. In that moment, Atlantis changed forever. After that crossing, Atlantis was no longer an unknown. It became a route. What was once feared was now traveled. What was once imagined was now measured. Ships began to move across it regularly, carrying goods, people, and ideas between continents. Trade routes formed. Empires expanded. Maps filled with detail where emptiness once remained. The ocean that had once separated worlds now connected them. But something else changed as well. The myths began to fade. Sea monsters disappeared from maps. The warnings at the edge of the world were erased. The unknown was replaced with coordinates, distances, directions. Atlantis was no longer a place of imagination. It was a system, predictable, navigable, understood. And yet, its vastness never truly diminished. Because even as ships crossed it with growing confidence, the ocean remained what it had always been: immense, unforgiving, indifferent. The transformation of Atlantis came at a cost. Every route that was mapped was learned through risk. Every safe passage was built on journeys that did not return. Storms still rose without warning. Waves still consumed ships whole. And beneath the surface, the ocean kept its depth and its silence. Understanding Atlantis did not tame it. It only made it possible to face. Over time, the stories that once defined the ocean, the creatures, the vanishing islands, the voices in the wind, began to disappear. Not because the ocean had changed, but because people had. Fear gave way to familiarity. Imagination gave way to explanation, and Atlantis lost something it once held: its mystery. Today, Atlantis is crossed in hours. Satellites map every current. Ships navigate with precision. The unknown has been reduced to data. There are no edges left on the map, no warnings carved into the boundaries of the world. The ocean that once stood as a barrier to human understanding has become part of it. And yet, if you look closely, if you stand at the shore and watch the horizon as it fades into distance, you can still feel it. That same vastness, that same silence, that same unanswered question, lingering just beyond sight, because Atlantis was never only a place, it was a reflection of what humanity did not yet know, and what it dared to imagine. In the echoes of history, Atlantis was never truly conquered. It was only understood, piece by piece, until the myths that once defined it quietly disappeared, and in their place stood the world we know today. Thank you for listening to Echoes of History. If you want to explore more stories where the unknown shaped our world, subscribe and listen closely, because history is still speaking.